what is you back again with another video. Today's video, we're finally back to the My Book series. Today's kind of a sad story, and so I don't know how to really start off, but just to get into it, really. So, in the war, the exile, the EDF and most of humanity, they begin to become desensitized to the amount of death that occurs in any given battle. But the Battle of the Silence, as it would be coined, would go down as one of the saddest fights, because there was a single survivor able to tell the story. The other survivor was left deaf, not able to speak. It was late in 2107, outside the cities of Madrid in Spain. And there was a small trench line to the south of Madrid. The 20 U.S. Marines that would be going to guard this location were ordered to hold the small trenches for as long as possible to give a place for the Marines in the city to get the civilians out, to exfil them. These 20 Marines, for the next 3 days, would battle for 250 Exil infantry, and not just any infantry, heavy infantry, which means that small arms fire, like your standard 5.56, etc., are going to struggle to kill, and 2 Exil bombers / fighters with the ability to cloak. The odds were against them. For the sake of the video, we are going to be going over it from the investigator standpoint. I will be playing the part of an investigator, asking the questions and telling you the story of which those answers were delivered. The 20 U.S. Marines that would volunteer are as follows: James, private; Bill, corporal; Philip, is a private; Jose, private; Ed, doc, basically your medic; John was a radio technician; Tom, private; Terry, master sergeant; Ethan, second lieutenant; Hendricks, staff sergeant; Tim, private; Bob, private first class; AJ, private; Don, private; Austin, heavy MG / technician; Abraham, also a technician / private; 2 unknowns, Spock, private; and Dan, private. Their location was not ideal. They were stuck on a clump of trees with a dug-in trench in the middle of an open field. Their supplies were low. They had 1 heavy MG, low on ammo and barely functioning, and 1 mortar team. On the mortars would be Private James and Private Jose. Their orders were to stand their ground with the mortar, to direct it at any foes that come against them. Heavy MG Austin was stationed to the south of their position of the trench line, using his heavy 50 caliber machine gun positioned to the south, overlooking the fields towards the city. And one of the letters off of Austin's body by the end of the battle, during the collection, wrote one of the letters from day 1 of their 3-day battle. It was the morning of that day, before the fighting had began. He wrote, "The skies were orange over the city. There was no sound, just thunder. There were no screams, just thunder. And the ground was still, but yet moved." This would be a common occurrence on the outskirts of any major battle during the war, The Exil used very strong and powerful weapons that the Earth forces, especially in the early half of the war, would have never seen before. The rest of the men were scattered throughout this trench line. This trench line was about 350 to 400 yards long, so it's quite a decent sized trench. The first day didn't see much action. The night of the first day, the bells of war had arrived. 2 Exil bombers, cloaked as U.S. Marine Corps helicopters, approached the trench line. Seeing friendly helicopters, Master Sergeant and Staff Sergeant Terry and Hendricks had believed that help had arrived. Within 100 yards of the trenches, the cloaks wore off, and hell came down from the sky. 3 privates were killed instantaneously from enemy heavy gunfire. The rest of the unit returned fire with small arms. They didn't have any anti-air guns. After about 4 hours of harassment from the Exil bombers and 4 U.S. Marines, now KIA, the helicopters had went away. The rest of the night was silent. Some wrote in the diaries that night that were found on their persons. The night was oddly silent. There was no sounds, no screams of agony. It was just quiet. No animals, no thunder from the city to the south. The next morning, one of the pickets set up had saw movement about 1,000 yards out. It was an Exil infantry division. It is unknown whether or not they were going there specifically for them in the trench, or if they were going to reinforce a unit in the city. But nonetheless, at 8 a.m., the infantry unit smack dab smacked the U.S. Marine Corps. Now, only 16 strong, with 2 wounded, so really 14 strong, Terry knew that his men had the challenge ahead of them. By the end of the first day, the fighting was so ferocious that nearly half of them were dead. James, private, status dead, shot 3 times, left arm, right arm, center chest. Bill, corporal, dead, bled out. Philip, private, status dead, cause shrapnel. Jose, private, status dead, cause headshot. The list goes on. By the morning of the second day, the battle was still soothing, the ground becoming red with the color of blood. Radio man John tried to call for help, screaming into the radio for anyone to come save them. But it was too late. Master Sergeant stood up to order his men, who now could not hear him from the firefight, to move back into the trench, as some men were trying to grab 1 or 2 of the wounded from outside the trench that had fallen out. He was struck twice in the right arm. Hendricks would write and tell, being one of the only sole survivors. Later on in the investigation, he would say, when Master Sergeant Terry was hit, everything stood still. The world stopped moving. We knew that our time on this planet was over. No one could have taken down Terry. Yet they did. He would be then hit 4 more times, once in the center of his skull, killing him instantly. Terry's body laid half out of a trench, half in. In the midst of the chaos, shrapnel punctured the left lung of the radio operator John. He was losing oxygen fast, unable to breathe, unable to speak. As he laid there, ready to die, Doc, or Ed, ran to his side, plugging the wound, telling him to hold on. But at the end of the second day, over half of the half that were alive were now dead. Staff Sergeant Hendricks, now in charge of the unit as the second highest in command, said that the battle had left a stain on the soil. Ethan, second lieutenant, dead, shot in the heart. Bomb, private first class, dead, shot in the chest. AJ, private, dead, also shot in the chest. Don, private, dead, also shot in the chest. While the enemy infantry was making its aggressive push, Austin, the heavy machine gunner holding the 50 cal to the south, in a brave effort to try to help the situation, picked up his MG, which was over 50-something pounds with all the ammo on his back, and carried it 150 yards to the other end of the trench that was being attacked. In this act of braveness, he was struck by an enemy RPG round, or something of the sorts. Exil rockets were quite experimental, and it blew him into 1,000 little pieces. 2 privates, unknown. They were 2 of the sole survivors of a regiment in the city who had fled with 1 dead individual to the trench to try to find aid from the dock. These 2 unknown men have never been identified. Their remains were never found. Only parts of them were. They were struck by enemy high voltage cannon, incinerating them almost instantaneously. Their status is MIA/dead. Spock, private, was struck in his right cervical cavity, so towards the right side of his neck. It was not enough to pierce his spine, but had a chunk missing from his neck, had arteries sticking out, and was slowly bleeding to death. The following men were dead by the 3rd morning. James, Bill, Philip, Jose, Ed, Tom, Terry, Ethan, Tim, Bob, AJ, Don, Austin, Abraham, 2 unknowns, Spock, and Dan. On the morning of the 3rd day, Hendricks was trying to save his fellow soldier And he looked over to his soldier Dan, his brother Dan, by this point, being one of only a handful left on the third day. Told him to retreat back towards the city. When Hendricks stopped to turn to fight, put a few rounds down the range, he was struck in the left of his shoulder. Dan, seeing this, panicked, seeing his best friend at this point just get struck and collapse to the ground, screamed for Hendricks to get up. In an instant, Dan was struck in the center of the skull and killed. Seeing his friend get struck, Hendricks grabbed his gun and stood up, now bleeding profusely out of his right arm, or his left arm, sorry. And then he was grazed in the center of his helmet by an enemy sniper shot. His helmet deflected the shot, but knocking him unconscious. John's radio message the day before had not gone unheard. To him and to the many men there that died, they were alone. But in fact they were not. Just 3.4 miles away on the third day, 2 F-49s and 1 X-86 left the military base just south of Madrid and flew the 3.4 miles to this location and annihilating all of the 250 Exil infantry. Battle of the Silence gets its name from Hendricks. He wrote, "When I was picked up on the third day by the 5th Marine Division, normally there is sounds after a battle. Animals scavenging, or cries of the dead, the wounded, even faint explosions in the distance. But this battle, there was silence. There was no one to cry in pain. There was no more fighting. There was no animals in this field. There was no storms. The reports from the rescuers that arrived after the airstrike said that when they walked onto the field, sorrow had struck them. Pain and loss had struck them. Every man in the unit had been hit at least one time. The numbers of Exil they managed to take down is unknown, but it is believed the 20 men were able to kill over 136 Exil in those 3 days. A remarkable and astounding feat by a small 20-man unit. Madrid would be held at the loss of 419,000 U.S. Marines and EDF forces alike. But on a small field, in a small trench, 20 brave men sacrificed themselves to hold that line. Hendricks would resume his duties as staff sergeant being promoted after the battle to Master Sergeant of his own unit. He said, though, his congratulations speech, that he had wished he could have spent this speech with his friends and his brothers. A small cross now lays in that field, and on it states, "We fought for silence. We died for silence." Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I wanted to do a heartfelt one because I feel like a lot of the story that I've been talking about has been glamorous in a way, or just ignoring the heartfelt pain and suffering that one experiences on the battlefield. This book has been such an amazing journey, and it's still not over yet, but there are so many stories, so many people in this story that exist across time, and I'm so excited to delve into them, and I hope you are as well. And as always, thank you for watching.